Everybody, Jay Weidner here. Thanks for watching. Please, if you like this program, share it with others and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscriptions because I hear magic happens when that happens. So please help me any way you can. Appreciate it. Today I have a special for you. This is a 2015 interview that I did with Art Bell and Stanton Friedman. It's actually a debate, the great Lunar debate. This is an interesting program. And what's interesting about it is that I was called by Art Bell's producer about a month before the program to schedule it. He's an old friend of mine, and he said, I've been trying to talk Art Bell into, having you on the show for ages, and now finally, he wants you on. So I'm like really excited because, I always liked Art Bell as an intelligent guy, went to Harvard and all that. So then I got all excited about it, ready to do it. About 1 hour before I go on, live radio, nationwide, I get a call from my friend, the producer. And he says, oh my God, Jay, you're not going to believe what's going on. And I go, what? He goes, Art decided that your message is so dangerous that he's going to bring Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist and UFO guy, on to debate you. They're going to double team you. And I was like, what? Oh, no. I thought I was going to have this nice, glorious time with Art Bell talking about Stanley Kubrick and all that. And now I've got Stanton Friedman and Art Bell, two huge bigwigs, are lined up to debate me. And I'm like, oh, my God. So I hung up the phone, and I was in a panic at first. So I went into my bedroom and I sat down on the floor on my rug that I use for meditation, and I meditated. I just said, I'm just going to calm down and meditate. So I meditated for a long time, like 40 minutes or so, and forgot all about time. It was one of the deepest meditations I'd ever had. And when I came out, I was like warrior ready, You get that Zen state, and it's just like, I can do anything. And that was the attitude I had as I went into this. So the phone rang, and it was Art Bell, and the show began. What's great about this show is, as you'll see as it goes along, that first I convince Art Bell that I'm right. Then slowly you can see Stanton Friedman toppling. He's on the fence. First he's adamantly against me. Then he's on the fence. Then he falls over the fence. So I think you'll enjoy this interview, or debate, the great Lunar debate, as I call it. And I think I handled myself pretty well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please subscribe, do whatever you can to help out the channel. Thank you.
We're all separated pretty widely here, actually. All right, so let's get right to this. To me, our going to the moon is America's crowning achievement. It's the crowning achievement of the world so far, really, in my opinion. Would either one of you disagree with that?
No.
No.
All right, so see, we start with agreement. Now let's bust it up. Jay, I know you believe that we may have gone to the moon. You're not sure, I guess, right?
Well, I can't say, but I mean, I have sources who've told me that we've been to the moon many times.
Okay. Many times.
Yeah, my premise is that the space program is much further advanced than they were letting us in on.
Okay.
And that Kennedy knew that Kennedy was shown in '61 some of the very advanced technologies that they'd gotten from the Germans. And we know this from an FBI document that where Marilyn Monroe told Dorothy Kilgallen that she had seen the alien stuff. And I believe that John made his speech about going to the moon, John F. Kennedy. Mm-hmm. It was in order to force, he knew that standard rocket technology would not do the job, at least not in the time period that he put forth. And so, and he knew that they had very advanced technologies, and I believe he made that speech right after he saw the technology in order to force that technology out into the open, but they had other plans. And so what they did was, and this is a newly released document just the last couple of months, in 1965, in June 1965, the U.S. Information Agency began looking at film directors, the top 6 film directors in the world, for some reason. And one of them was Stanley Kubrick. And he was not a big director in June of 1965. He'd just done Dr. Strangelove, which did all right, but he'd never really had a breakout film, not until 2001: Space Odyssey. So I believe, and also I'll say this, of all the filmmakers in his time period, the only one that actually understood the technical aspects of filmmaking was Stanley Kubrick. He knew how to shoot, he knew how to edit, he knew how to light, he knew how to do everything. Whereas somebody like Billy Wilder was more of a theater director and didn't really understand the technical mechanics involved in making films. He had other people that did that. Only Kubrick in his time was the consummate filmmaker and understood all aspects of filmmaking. And he would be the guy you would choose if you were going to fake this. Now, why would you fake it? And the answer is, well, one, national security reasons. You don't want the Soviet Union to see what you got. Two, what if something goes wrong? Do you really want the whole world watching 2 astronauts dying on the surface of the moon? All they would have had to do was clip a rock, and that thing would have tumbled and broke, and it could never have been repaired. So and also they didn't want people to see some of the artifacts that are all over the moon. And so they hired Stanley Kubrick. He used 2001: Space Odyssey as a cover, and also as a research and development in how to do the faking.
Okay,
and,
can I stop you for a second, please?
Yes,
if I was listening carefully, you're suggesting that the rocketry that we had at that time, the president knew, Kennedy knew, would not do the job. You did say that, right?
Yes, I did.
So that would mean then that the Saturn V that we saw lift off that took men to the moon, that was wrong. Wasn't real.
Well, I mean, just a few years before the Saturn V was finished, Werner von Braun told CBS, I believe it was, that the rocket would have to be the size of the Empire State Building.
Well, it was pretty big.
Well, it wasn't the size of the Empire State.
No, but all I'm asking is a straight-out question. The Saturn V that we saw lifting men ultimately to the moon, that was fake.
It was a real rocket, and it really went off and everything. But
where'd it go?
Well, I don't know where they went. I'm not going to speculate on where they went. All I can do is not speculate and tell you that, about the filming techniques and also Stanley's confession in The Shining. The entire
all right, I don't know about
Shining.
that, but let's get
well,
right.
You'll like it.
All right, well, I'll have to like it in a bit.
Okay.
The stuff we took on the moon, the photography on the moon, that was all fake.
Yep, it was all fake. It was all done in a studio using a technique called front screen projection, which is hardly anybody today understands what front screen projection is. Fortunately, I worked with it 30 years ago when I worked in Hollywood, and I know very well the fingerprints that front screen projection leaves behind, and every single Apollo image has the telltale fingerprints of front screen projection.
All right, Stanton, feel free to jump in anywhere here.
Well, yeah, I think I'm certainly in disagreement with a good chunk of that. I am not a filmmaker, and I am not going to pretend to be one. But there are several different questions involved here. One is technology. There's no question. My mantra is progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. And certainly when Kennedy made that speech, we hadn't yet built a big enough rocket. We hadn't spent the money. And one of the key things here is that there are a lot of stories going around about German technology, some of which I think are straight baloney. Partly because Hitler wasn't a nice guy. If he had figured out all this... Look, I'm saying flying saucers are real. I've been saying that for a long time. But if Hitler had Hitler's people had figured out how to make stuff like that, he would have used it. He wasn't a nice guy who said, well, we don't want to give a hard time to these nice guys over across the water. Not at all. He'd have used it. And so it's very hard to separate out the mythology. And I think there's a key point here that I didn't really find out until yesterday. And that is that I have a friend who had business dealings with the people at NASA Houston. And he was admiring some of the pictures that were around the waiting room, so to speak.
Right.
And they made clear to him that, well, most of that talent isn't from what we got on the moon. It's what we did to it after we got the information back. And then it struck me that, I'm old enough to know how much technology has improved in our working lifespan. Compared today's computers with what we had in the 60s and early 70s.
So you're saying they did touch up? You're saying what? Touch up?
Well, yeah, enhancement, what do you want to call it? Compressing and all the technological stuff that we do today.
Okay, that's all right.
It is very much fancier, if you want to put it that way.
Of course.
And we take it for granted. The kids don't understand when I tell them, hey, I wasn't allowed to touch a computer when I was working in the industry. What do you mean? Well, you filled out an input data sheet. Somebody key punched cards, and a girl went with a big reel of tape and the deck of cards up to the computer facility that you weren't allowed anywhere near, which used a tremendous amount of air conditioning equipment because it was vacuum tubes and stuff like that. And the next day or two, you got back output. But you didn't touch the computer? Come on, that's specialists. So what I'm saying is that whole world has changed enormously. Call it Moore's Law, whatever you want to call it. But the capability of straight photography, if you will, a funny way to put it, has changed drastically. And remember, the last Apollo flight was 1972. Can you imagine how much things have changed since then? So
I can, but there's a basic thing that we're working with here. One of you is saying these pictures are all fake, and Stanton, you seem to be saying, well, maybe they're touched up a little bit, but they're the real thing taken on the moon. And there's even a lot. It's a pretty damn big deal, in my opinion. Either those are real photographs of what we did that changed the world, or they're not.
They're not.
They are.
If you look at every art, if you go to any Apollo site where they have all the photographs, go to the photographs and begin looking, and you will see a telltale break in the horizon behind the astronauts. It's in every shot. The grain on the ground changes. It's a direct, straight line right behind it, and you can see the granularity of the surface of the ground changes in every shot. That is a fingerprint, telltale fingerprint of the use of front screen projection. He perfected it in the 8 scenes in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which were all shot in a studio. Everybody in Hollywood agrees that nobody could do front screen projection like Stanley Kubrick. And
Jay, I'm not a photographic expert, but what about okay, I'll take that from you. What about what Stanton said? What if that is an indication of somebody who has enhanced or done a little something with the photographs? Doesn't mean they're totally fake. It means perhaps they've been upgraded.
Okay, so the way that
that's a good word. I like that.
Okay.
The way that front screen projection works is you have a stage, and then you have a screen that's behind the actors or the astronauts, and then you project an image that is front screen, not rear screen. Your rear screen is what they used to use in movies when they're driving the car and you see the streets going by behind the window.
Oh, yes.
It always looked a little fake and a little off.
Right.
And Kubrick hated it. He just hated rear screen projection, and he perfected front screen projection because you don't get that loss of about a half an f-stop in the background. Everything stays the same luminescence. And so he perfected it. And the thing is that every single every single scene in 2001 that uses front screen projection has this telltale line between the stage and the screen, and every single Apollo photograph also has the telltale line between the stage and the screen.
So to you, that means it's all faked.
Yeah, it is all fake. I mean, if you take the astronauts bouncing around on the moon, and you just put them in a video editing thing, and you speed them up by about 40%, they're walking around regular. They're obviously being shot in slow motion. Now, here's the thing. Kubrick could not fake, in 2001, he could not figure out how to fake slow motion very well, so he shot all the slow motion scenes in all the low gravity scenes in slow motion, because he couldn't really figure out what zero G would look like.
Okay, can you answer this for me? Why would they fake it? If we actually... And you admit we might have gone to the moon. If we did go to the moon, then why fake the photography?
Because of several reasons. One, we didn't want the Soviets to see anything that we have or had. Two, if something went wrong, and we had 2 astronauts dying in front of the entire world on the moon from exposure. That would be very, very, very bad. Nixon was president; he would never allow that to happen. And they just didn't. They were putting all of the money. I believe they were putting all of those billions of dollars, $30-40 billion, into secret space program, black op projects. Everybody that was working at NASA was really working. They were really building things that were being used. Everything was real, but they decided that they would just show the fake, and that way they wouldn't have to show the real equipment that they really had. And this is not rash speculation. I mean, we have not gone anywhere hardly at all. In all these years, we're still driving around in automobiles that use a combustion engine from 100 years ago.
Right. There
is a glass ceiling, and they've Ben Rich of Skunk Works, right before he died.
And there was much said, Stanton, about why we did it. And Jay Weidner believes we did it because we were afraid of what failure would look like. I think that's that sums it up, Jay, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Stanton?
I think, remember, we lost 3 guys on the pad. 3 guys died, Grissom and White, and I forget the name of the third one. Should do better, but it's late at night here. I think that we're leaving. I do have a question that maybe Jay can answer that's relevant here. The footage that you see on all these websites, supposedly from the Apollo missions, is that from film brought back by the astronauts, or was it radio transmission of images?
Well, the video, which is very crappy quality, is broadcast from the moon. There's a 4-second delay, and NASA then recorded over those 2-inch videotapes. So that footage is all missing and gone now. They didn't have enough money, so they reused the 2-inch videotape reels and shot other stuff over it. So we have none of the original footage is available.
I actually heard that. Heard that, and it's unbelievable to me. How could we possibly do that? Have you heard that, Stanton?
Yes, I have, and people change, and there have been a lot of dumb things done in the world. Didn't on one of the space missions somebody use metric or not metric?
Yeah.
Things like mistakes happen.
All right,
I'm not saying that's good, but okay. So we're not talking about
something. Let me point out something that's very important here that I haven't ever really said in public before. If you take a long-term film production, like, say, Lord of the Rings, you'll notice, if you're an astute film watcher, you'll notice that the production values get better with each film. By the time the 3rd film goes out, everybody who's been working together for like 3 or 4 years is all humming together, the well-oiled machine, and the production values are, by the 3rd film, have skyrocketed, actually, over the 1st film.
Okay.
In every way. Okay, you can see the same. You can note it, and you will see the same exact thing in the Apollo footage. First, you have Apollo 11, which is they're just shot against a black background. There's no mountains, there's nothing. Then Apollo 12, they conveniently point the camera at the sun in the first few seconds that they land on the moon, destroying the camera so we have no footage. Apollo 13, again, it goes awry, and we have no footage from that because they never landed. Apollo 14, now the production values have drastically improved in the 2 years between 11 and 14. 15, again, a huge leap in production value. 16, again, and 17 is just spectacular. I mean, the production values in 17 are just amazing. Each mission, the mountains are getting more complicated. Everything is getting more complicated because the crew is learning how to do things. They're learning how to work together, how to make the thing work and function better as far as...
And by crew, you mean the crew on the ground faking all this, right?
Yeah, they're learning how to do it. And you can see each production gets better.
The signals back.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
from the moon.
Hold on. Let Stanton speak. Go ahead, Stanton.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just trying to sort out. I started off by saying that technology is incredibly advanced over the years. You're saying they didn't get any better at transmitting the signals and better systems, better equipment, and all the rest of that?
Not really. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the lighting. I'm talking about the photography. I'm talking about the sets. I'm talking about the general production values. But
you're also saying, I think you're saying, aren't you, that all of the astronauts who were supposedly on the moon cavorting for the cameras are lying.
Well, that's a really good point. I will bring up 2 points which are very important in response to that. First off, Buzz Aldrin wrote a book when he got back called Return from the Moon. And in that book, he reports, and you can read the book, you can get it on Amazon, he says that on the 1-year anniversary on July 20th, 1970, he was in Vegas at a big celebration for the 1-year anniversary, and he stood up in front of a crowd for really the first time. And a reporter said to him, "Hey, Buzz, tell us what it was really like to be on the moon." And this, I'll paraphrase what Buzz says. He says, my stomach began to become nauseated. I got a gigantic headache. I could not speak. I started shaking uncontrollably. My wife had to take me into the alley where I shook for a half hour. I simply could not answer the question. Now, I will redirect you all to a Stanley Kubrick film called A Clockwork Orange, in which people were put in front of movies, given drugs, and every time that they would have a thought about something, they would get sick. Okay, that's the plot of Stanley Kubrick's movie after 2001. Second point. One of my good friends, was Dr. Robert Masters. He's a hypnotherapist. He's now deceased. He's a very famous hypnotherapist in his time. Edgar Mitchell came to Bob Masters. Bob Masters told me this. Edgar Mitchell came to him after he landed and came back from the moon and said, "Bob, you have to hypnotize me. I cannot remember anything about the moon." And Bob Masters put him into regression hypnotherapy, and he never, ever remembered anything.
And, I've got to verify that. I actually had him on the air.
Yep.
And I asked him.
Remember the show.
Oh, you do?
Yep.
This is true. And I asked him to please, if he could, close his eyes and think about what it felt like to be on the moon with any words that he could put together to get us to understand that. And there was this long pause.
Yeah.
And he said, Art, it's a funny thing. I don't remember much of it. And it stopped me cold. So that much I can verify. Stanton, had you heard that?
I hadn't heard that. As a matter of fact, Edgar wrote the foreword to my book, Flying Saucers and Science. And certainly I don't consider him a liar. Now, you're not calling him a liar.
No,
I'm not calling anybody a liar.
Nor am I calling him a liar. Yes, I know he's spoken about many things like that, Stanton, but in terms of his memory of walking on the moon,
Remember.
he doesn't.
And And another point I would put forth is on YouTube is the press conference for the Apollo 11 astronauts after they got back.
Yes.
I think everybody should watch that. The body language of these three guys is not, high five and we did it, dudes. Let's celebrate. This very sober, sombering press conference. There's no joy in any of their eyes. Neil Armstrong will not even look up. He just looks down at the desk the whole time. It's very disconcerting.
Stanton, any comment on all this?
I think it's certainly unusual. And what I'm suggesting is that the Russians were certainly watching that footage and looking for any signs that this was fraudulent. Don't you think?
I do, but again, front screen projection is not it's a very esoteric art. Maybe 5 people in the 1960s even knew how to do it, and they were all working on 2001: A Space Odyssey. In other words, Kubrick had all of the front screen projection experts in the world working with him during. And let's point out some other things. 2001: A Space Odyssey begins production in 1964 and ends in 1968. Apollo begins in 1964, culminates in the landing in 1969. Fred Ordway is running the Apollo program, but somehow can find time to fly to London and be Stanley Kubrick's top scientific advisor on 2001: A Space Odyssey. At the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, in its original projection, which has now been removed, we're credit after credit thanking McDonnell Douglas and all of these high-tech aircraft companies. I have the whole credits, and I saved them, and I have them, and they've been since removed. And you look at the internecine thing going on between the film 2001: A Space Odyssey and NASA, and it becomes fantastic. I mean, never in the history of filmmaking has anybody cooperated like this. And I'll end it with this. The head of MGM is quoted as saying, I kid you not, in 1968, at the beginning of 1968, he is quoted as saying, "I have no idea what the budget for 2001: A Space Odyssey is, and I don't care." Does that sound like the head of a studio would say that?
I don't know the heads of any studios.
Yeah, we're not giving enough substance to whether or not, the film on the moon was actually real. I mean, if the whole thing was faked, that would be a scandal of scandals. It would.
Yep.
I don't know what I'm going to say. It just would be. It would blow everything else away if it suddenly came out that all that was faked. Now, I've got a question for you,
remember,
Jay.
we did leave stuff. There is stuff on the moon that was left by astronauts. Seismographs. There were rocks that were brought back, which are certainly moon rocks and not Earth rocks.
Are you sure? I mean, the president of Denmark, he was given a moon rock, and now he's told that it wasn't even real. I mean, this over and over this is happening. How do we know they're really moon rocks? But by the way, I think they went to the moon, so that is really not indicative of what we're talking about. But
Jay, you think we went to the moon? How do you think we went?
I think we have very high advanced, and we have had for a while, very advanced ships that can get there rather quickly. And NASA I've talked to.
What are they using for propulsion?
Yeah, what are they using?
It's electromagnetic. That's what I was told almost 20 years ago.
Quite a jump.
Yeah, and furthermore, NASA, which is somebody in high up, I used to work with Richard Hoagland a lot back in the early 90s, and because he alienated everybody at NASA, I could actually get people to talk to me. I could actually get people to talk to me that were higher ups, and they told me that they had electromagnetic drives back in '94. I was told that.
Okay, Stanton, you're a nuclear physicist. If something like this was going on, wouldn't you have channels to know it too?
Well, it's kind of funny. In my congressional testimony at the hearings about UFOs in 1968, a written testimony, 6 testified in person, 6 more in writing, I talked about electromagnetic propulsion in the atmosphere, magneto-aerodynamic propulsion. And it's interesting. I had I thought I was getting the ideal job working for McDonnell Douglas to figure out how flying saucers work. This is in 1969 or so. And as I'm driving across the country to take my exciting new job after the nuclear rocket program went kibosh, I hear on the radio that the program was canceled. So, you walk in, they say, you realize we just laid off 5,000 people. That's not a good way to start a new job.
No.
And one of the things I did in the 3 months that they were kind enough to keep me there was a survey on government documents, a collection of information, a bibliography, if you will, using one key word, magnetoaerodynamics. And much to my amazement, I got 900 references, and about 90% of them were classified.
Does that
Abstract.
does that propulsion get us from here to the moon?
No, it doesn't. That's what I was going to get onto. That works beautifully in the atmosphere where there's an electromagnetic submarine. Two different people have built one. You have an electrically conducting fluid, seawater in the one case, ionized air in the other case. And everybody is familiar with this, although they don't use the names. When we came back from the moon, when the command module comes into the atmosphere, it glows. You can't communicate for a couple minutes and all that stuff. That's because it creates an ionized air plasma. Meteors do it all the time.
Right. Right.
And so there was even a study showing if you went to Mars when you came back, if you used magnetoaerodynamic control instead of retro rockets, you'd save weight. Of course, we haven't gone to Mars. Well, maybe somebody says we have. Well, I guess some people are saying we have.
Let's not take on Mars yet.
We built cities.
But Jay is saying we may have gone to the moon, but we did it with electromagnetic.
And I would
have
point
no
out
idea.
Again?
I would
I have
point
no
out that
idea what that means.
Okay.
Well, NASA announced last week that they have an electromagnetic drive that can go to the moon in 4 hours. This was a NASA announcement, official last week.
They were saying they were working on it. There's an enormous gulf between this is what I would like to do and this is what I have available to do it. And it's one of the problems when I look at some of the studies, Mr. Farrell's study about Nazi technology. There's a difference between an artist's concept and a real photograph. And it's in some ways, I guess that's what we're talking about, although I hadn't thought of it that way. And all kinds of proposals have been made for big money. And that's what they're looking at is artist concept, which is not the same as a photograph. And I feel that way about a lot of the so-called Nazi technology. They were looking at it, they were thinking about it. That doesn't mean they built it or were able to. There's a little thing called money in between and time. Maybe I should mention here that when I worked a long time ago at General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department in Cincinnati, in 1958, we spent $100 million. And that was the budget that year. And that was a lot of money in 1958. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. Now, we're not talking 6 professors and 20 grad students. So there are a lot of, I'll call them huge programs that have gone on. The stealth aircraft, we spent $10 billion over 10 years, in secret, mind you. The A&P program, the data was secret, but the existence of the program wasn't. So there have been some huge programs out there. And as I say, there's a difference between what you're talking about doing. I can show you beautiful pictures of an aircraft nuclear propulsion system, but it's not real.
What's your reaction then to Ben Rich's statement that they're 70 years ahead of conventional technologies?
The point was made that Ben Rich said something, and I've heard different versions of what he supposedly said, how many years ahead we are, and also that he said we could send E.T. home. And again, I would make the distinction between what I think we can do if we continue on this path and what we are able to do tomorrow. And having worked for major corporations, I know that we like to talk about just give us the dough and away we will go, if you'll pardon terrible poetry. And I think we don't pay enough attention to that distinction. Did Ben mean that if we decided to open the money faucet, that we could do this, that, or the other thing? Or did he mean that if you want a ticket, you can buy one tomorrow? And all kinds of projects that start and don't finish. A Cold War mentality was part of this.
Oh, yes. And then, actually, if you don't mind, Stan, that brings up another question. If we faked all the footage from the moon, Jay, I'd be very interested to know, the Soviets, now the Russians, really have some pretty good technology that rivals a lot of what we do. They would know it. Why wouldn't they blow that wide open?
Well, they did, actually. Pravda was constantly saying that the moon landings were faked. Just nobody here was picking it up. I have the issues. Also, what people don't realize is that the Russians actually landed on the moon first, not us. Luna 4, I think it was, and it left behind reflectors for lasers and a bunch of equipment. And it wasn't manned, but it was there first, proving, of course, that you can go and land stuff without ever putting a human on the moon and get stuff and have it work. Yeah. So, but the Russians were, in some ways kind of I don't know. They were impressed by what we were doing, but they didn't quite know how we were faking it. In fact, the secret lay completely hidden until.
No. Wait. Do you mean they were impressed? Do you mean they were impressed with our film capability, or they were impressed that we landed on the moon?
They were impressed that they thought it was faked, but they were impressed, and they weren't sure how we did it. I mean, none of these articles ever say how they faked it. They just say, "Oh, look at the shadows; they're uneven," and they point out all these other things. But nobody knew about the front screen projection until I uncovered it, and only because I'm an expert in front screen projection, and that's when I found the tool that was used to create the fakery. And the lines are undoubt. There's no doubt. They're unmistakable. There's a line where the granularity of the ground actually changes along a straight line, and that is the telltale signal of front screen projection.
Well, also, all right. This is a little unfair to Stanton because he's not a film expert. If it gets right down to the technical aspects of the film, then we should have somebody on who could dispute that if you're wrong. But certainly I can't, and I don't think Stanton can.
Even the idea that you can take 70 millimeter Ektachrome film through the Van Allen belts and be on the moon when you can't even take it through an airport detector without it getting fogged, the whole idea is just kind of absurd. I mean,
Stanton, is that really true? I mean, could you carry film?
Well, no, because radiation shielding was what I worked on for a number of years. And the role of the Van Allen belts here gets to be a sticky one. It depends on how long you're in and what you're inside of and all the rest of that. It's complicated. It's like some people, not tonight, but some people have made it sound to me as if they thought, gee, if you get exposed to radiation, you're going to die, you're going to get cancer right away, and all this kind of stuff. And people have a deathly fear of radiation. You can see that, incidentally, on the recent flyby past Pluto. I watched a lot of coverage, read a lot, didn't see anybody talking about the fact that the energy source was a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, a little small nuclear device using plutonium, no less. And it'll run for another 20 years. It's already run for 10 years. And that's a remarkable accomplishment. Think about that. And I heard nobody saying, hey, the energy for this whole Pluto business is coming from a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, and we've used dozens of them in our deep space mission. For people who are wondering, why can't you use solar energy? Well, because the further away you get from the sun, the lower the energy intensity is.
Sure.
And, Pluto is a heck of a lot further than the Earth is from the sun. But
I totally agree with you, Stanton, that people overestimate the effects of radiation. I totally think you're right on that. Their fear drives them, and I don't think that going through the belt is going to kill you. I don't mean that. What I'm saying is that sitting on the surface of the moon with your camera, with ectochrome, film rolled into your camera, and it's 250 degrees in the sun above zero and 250 degrees below zero in the shade. How in the heck is that film going to maintain its stability? I mean, you can't put film into an oven at 200 degrees and it's just going to melt. And the whole idea is just, I don't know, it's just, as a photographer.
Well, wait a minute, I thought you said that they sent back television signals. Television may be the wrong word in this case, but...
no, that's not television.
Okay, so they were sent back, radio waves were sent back. And what happened with the film, supposedly? I don't know.
The film, there's two different things we're talking about. One is the ectochrome film that's in the still cameras that they have on their breastplate. And then the video is sent back via, it's a video camera that sends the signal back to Houston, or actually to Australia. And so they're two different mediums, is what I'm saying.
Okay, but the motion picture footage that you're talking about is basically the TV stuff, right? Mm-hmm. The Kubrick stuff, if you will.
The very low quality video stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so we agree it was low quality. I mean, after all, it was in the 60s and early 70s. And could we do better now, for example?
Oh, yeah, much better. That's the thing is, that's why it's so irritating that they erased the original tapes, because what we're looking at is second, third, fourth generation. And if I could get my hands on the first generation, then I can maybe prove that they did go even. But I don't have that proof now.
In my mind, I cannot picture anybody, who's got their hands on the moon landing film going, we don't need this anymore.
The tape.
Yeah, toss this one and toss this one. We need to clean this place out and toss that one. Mankind's greatest achievement, and they throw it away?
Yep.
I agree that is suspicious, and, there's no way around that, or stupid. I mean, maybe they go together.
Or maybe you agree a little bit that it is suspicious?
If they've got me...
I do agree that it's suspicious.
If I had that access to the first generation videotape, I would be able to, without any doubt, be able to tell you whether it was fake or real.
Okay, well, now maybe you're talking about motivation for throwing it away.
Exactly.
I really hate jumping over on your side, Jay, but I mean, why else? It's such a stupid thing to do. There's got to be a motivation.
Well, it is, and I had a friend, he was a rocket scientist named Bill Wood. I think he's still alive. And if you're out there, Bill, hey, long time no see. And he told me that he was at a conference of rocket engineers, and they were putting forth this rocket that was going to soft land here on Earth. And they said, hey, this is the first time that we've ever done a soft landing. And Bill Woods, Dr. Wood raised his hand and said, that's not true. We've done 6 soft landings already. What are you talking about? And they didn't even consider that the Apollo landings were, credible even in this group.
I don't know what to say about that. And certainly I will try. I mean, I've met several astronauts, and I do have difficulty with saying that basically, remember, because part of your story now is that they had to be going through hoops here on Earth at a soundstage, right?
No, it wouldn't be. Because of the gold visor conveniently being used, we don't know who those people are in those suits. I mean, we don't know who they are. You can't see them. You can't see their faces. We don't know who they are. And again, why are they using the gold visor? What's the point of that? Except maybe to hide their faces, Well, I don't understand.
Gold is a good reflecting material and all that sort of stuff, but
could be true. I mean,
what I'm point.
Stanton, it sounds like he's beginning to talk you into it.
There's an old, not enough data. I have a big gray basket, a very large gray basket. Everybody I get a lot of calls, they want a yes or a no on everything.
Right.
And not a maybe. And I often have to say, look, I don't know enough to be able to come down on one side or the other. It's up in the air in space.
Yeah, I remember your gray basket, indeed. So you're almost ready to put this into that basket?
Well, yes, because I have a lot of questions and I don't know how to get answers to many of them. And as Jay just said, there'd be a difference if we had the original footage. And, if you talk about bonehead plays, certainly, having that footage gone seems to be one of the worst that I'm aware of.
Well, then there was
that we don't know about yet.
Then remember there was the destruction of all the Roswell records too, right?
Yeah, somehow they got destroyed.
Hold on, you two. My guests are Jay Weidner. He's an expert on film, and we've got Stanton Friedman here. I keep wanting to call him doctor. Sorry about that. So let's see where we agree and where we disagree. We seem to be...
Well, there's a point I'd like to make, Art.
Fire away.
To go back to Ben Rich and nuclear. When you talk about how far advanced technology is, I find that many people, a typical example is that we have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. These exist now. They're operating out on the high seas there that can operate for 18 years without refueling. And people look at me like, what are you talking about? I say they're nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, and they operate without refueling. This makes an enormous difference on your tactics on the ocean if you don't need to worry about how much fuel you're using. That's an enormous impact. So that's part of what I meant about maybe it's technology that we are thinking about versus what we already have. In this case, many people are shocked. It's like people don't even appreciate the fact that nuclear-powered submarines, we heard an awful lot about German U-boats during the war, what a threat they were to the convoys in the oceans and so forth and so on. But they could stay underwater for maybe a day because you need air for the diesel engines. Taking care of the people is easy. Air for the engines is not. Now we have submarines that can go around the world underwater. And when they go past a beautiful island, they take periscope leave, as one guy put it to me. Which is a clever remark, but it's true that's an enormous advance, over the past, and a lot of people simply aren't aware of it. And
what we're talking about here, Jay said we have jumped, even back then, we have jumped ahead to some sort of electromagnetic drive, some sort of something that we can get us from here to the moon, and we had it back then.
Well, I saw the recent article, and it really wasn't saying we have it. This is a study being done about a possible means of doing it.
I understand, Stanton, but he's talking about having had that back when we did the moon landings that he says were fake photographed.
Yeah, and I don't think we did, and to tell you the truth. Again, there's such a fine line, if there is any, between truth and half-truth and no truth when it comes to technology. I mean, I've seen all kinds of claims. I'm a flying saucer guy, and I hear all kinds of stories which turn out to be baloney.
So, Stanton, let me ask you a question. You don't believe that we back-engineered anything from Roswell or anything like that, right?
No, I didn't say that. Again, let me give you an example of something I did think we did learn from Roswell. I'm the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident, and my view about what you would do when you got all the pieces of wreckage, you'd send them out to your best classified labs, and you'd say, what is this stuff? This fine foil-like material, very strong, very lightweight, etc. And a guy comes back and said, it's a combination of samarium and cobalt. Why would you put those two things together? Not your problem. You send it out to somebody else. What are the electromagnetic, thermal, nuclear properties of this stuff? And the guy comes, you don't tell him where you got it. He doesn't have a need to know for that. Maybe he thinks it came from a spy, see? And he comes back and says, the highest magnetic moment I've ever measured. What a wonderful permanent magnet material this would be. And pretty soon you're building ghetto blasters with samarium cobalt magnets in the speakers. That's real, incidentally. And I for a while, several years, did a weekly science commentary for CBC Radio here in Fredericton. And I did one, I read a lot, it was fun. And I did one on new and better permanent magnet materials, neodymium, boron, and iron. I'm not making these up, they're real. At the end of the article, it said the original work on samarium cobalt was done at Wright Air Development Center, at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and I just laughed my head off. In other words, I think that the basic idea came from somebody saying, hey, what is this stuff? A second, in my book, there's a picture of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module. I spoke to the NASA people there in Southern California, and they took me on a tour and took my picture with the command module and stuff. Strangely enough, they didn't want the North American Rockwell people to come to the presentation, only the NASA people. Don't ask me to explain that because I don't have an explanation for it. But and the point was that they were very interested on the one hand, and on the other hand, who knew what the real stuff going on was? And I didn't.
Well, all right. Again, we're closer to
that, but
we're
we're
in more agreement than disagreement. Do you both believe it is possible? This is a straight out question that from the crash at Roswell, we built something that could take us to the moon and back real quick.
No, I don't believe that.
No?
I believe that it's that in combination with what else we had, yes. Not that alone, though, but in combination with the other technologies that we had discovered and also developed. Don't forget, Hitler was not just financing these guys to create exotic technologies. He was also sending expeditions into Tibet, into northern Africa, into Peru, looking for ancient advanced technologies. He admitted it, and these expeditions were run by the SS, the occult division of the SS. So he was making a major plan to try to recover as much of the past as possible and apply it. And when you take that and then you add the Roswell stuff, 1947, hey, by 1955, you could be really far advanced, especially with the backing of the United States, which was the richest country on Earth.
Well, one of the problems here is that if you gave the smartest people on the planet a cheap digital wristwatch, say $25 wristwatch, back in the 30s, he would know it was a watch, and he'd know there's a battery there, but he had no way to examine the chip, or certainly no way to duplicate it. And so, it's like Christopher Columbus, I need a nuclear-powered submarine, and I got unlimited money. Can you build one for me? And the answer would have been no. There's too big a gap between where we are and where we would have to be. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier about the difference between having good ideas and being in a position to build, create, duplicate, whatever you want to call it, that technology. Ideas aren't enough.
Okay, so you're saying we were not in that position, so we could not have had such craft.
So then we didn't go to the moon.
That's what I'm saying. And also, if we had such craft, why wouldn't we be using it instead of some of our airplanes that are currently, like how expensive they are? But,
all right.
What I'm trying to say is, I don't think that if we had advanced technology that would be useful in the building of, call them bombers as a generic class of craft able to put destruction all over the place, I don't think that we would not do it. What bothers me is that the military budget on this planet this year is approximately $1 trillion. That's an awful lot of dough. That tells you something about the people on this planet. And I think if we had the kind of technology that would enable you to build a bunch of fancy vehicles, aircraft in particular, I think we would. And so, there's a disconnect, in other words, between the idea of, well, we've got all this technology, but we're not using it, or we're hiding it.
But I don't understand, because the military for sure has advanced technologies, aircraft and things, and the two maxims of the military to win a battle is take the high ground and keep everything secret. And so perfecting this kind of technology would thoroughly satisfy those two things that you need to have to win a war.
Why would you keep building the old stuff?
Because you want your enemies to all think that that's what you've got, so that when the time comes and you can strike quickly. Surprise and the high ground are the two most valued things in military operations, and this kind of weaponry gives you both of those advantages, but you have to keep it a secret, otherwise you lose your advantage. And
well, maybe it's mythological too. Maybe you want the other guy to think you've got this technology, even though you don't. That's good psychology too.
You remember Star Wars?
Except that I've actually seen some of this technology with my own eyes. I was out near Vandenberg Air Force Base 10 years ago, and I saw, a craft flying right over Vandenberg Air Force Base. There was nobody scrambling their jets. There was nobody going up to look at the craft. They had to have seen it. It was right over the base. I'm sure it was military.
Well, now you're off into different territory. You're off into ufology, and I think we're all with you here. That could have been why they didn't scramble something. I don't know.
Well,
maybe
all I'm saying is that it's in the military's advantage to keep these things a secret. I think we can all agree on that. How advanced they are, I don't know. If Stanton,
I had a clearance for 14 years, and I have. There are some limits on what secrets you can keep, even though there are plenty of secrets that have been kept. One of them is to cover up the mistakes you make. Well, isn't that true?
Yeah.
You don't want people to know because, whoops, look what we did. Sorry about that, folks.
What I'm trying to understand, though, is you're saying that Philip Corso is not correct, and we didn't have all these...
Yes, I certainly am saying that Corso is not correct. I've written about Corso. I've got an article that I sent to people, Fraud in Ufology, and I focus on let me be specific. I don't want to just cast dispersions.
All right, gentlemen, before you get specific, we're out of break, so I don't want to start this and not be able to finish it. Okay. When we come back, the subject is going to be Philip Corso, so stay right there.
So that's the first hour of the great Lunar debate with Jay Weidner versus Stanton Friedman and Art Bell. As you can see, it's very entertaining. I was at the top of my game, and I think that I proved a lot of very serious points in this debate. I'm very thankful to Art Bell for having me on, and very thankful to Stanton Friedman. And both of these gentlemen have now passed on, and I'm honored to have been with them. And also, I want to just say one other thing about this. If you listen, I don't think Stanton Friedman knows who I am. I mean, I produced a number of interviews with him, but I don't think he knows that it was me from Gaia that was debating him. I just have a sneaking suspicion he doesn't know in the debate who I really am. Anyway, part 2 is next, and I'll have that up in a few days. Thanks for watching.